In chickens and poultry, we can see Staph aureus infections at many anatomic sites. Bones, tendon sheaths, and joints are most common. Those animals who survive these infections may have chronically swollen joints, they may be reluctant to stand, and they can develop sort of a secondary gangrenous dermatitis of the feet that we call bumblefoot. This organism is also associated with green liver osteomyelitis complex, and at a flock level, morbidity and mortality is typically quite low. So it's not something we see outbreaks of. It's something that tends to affect individual animals. This is an image of a Japanese quail with bumblefoot caused by Staph aureus. And I think you can appreciate that this foot highlighted by the red arrow is quite large. It's swollen. It's inflamed, maybe a little bit reddened as compared to the normal foot highlighted with the green arrow. So classical lesions of bumblefoot. Here we have the feet of a red-tailed hawk with bumblefoot. This animal also had more proximal lesions as well. So purulent tenosynovitis, so an infection of the joints and tendon sheaths associated with pus, and also osteomyelitis, or an infection of the bone. Similar lesions would be seen in chickens. This is a post-mortem examination of some chicken feet from a bird with very severe bumblefoot. So on the left here, you can see a very, very enlarged, reddened, inflamed, swollen foot. And then on the back side of the foot, you can see this almost cavitary lesion. You can imagine that there's an abscess here with purulent material. Here we have some images of a bird with septic arthritis, so purulent material in a joint, and sternal bursitis. Here you can see the bird's sternum, and on this side, we have an inflamed and what looks like a fluctuant lesion. Sternal bursitis is actually quite common in flocks that have Staph aureus arthritis. So these infectious processes tend to go together within individuals. The pathogenesis of the poultry diseases is not clearly defined, although it's likely opportunistic. So we know that birds are oftentimes colonized with Staph aureus, and it's likely that they become infected when host defenses are breached. So perhaps they get a cut on their foot. Good management practices to reduce stress and injury are therefore key. You want to remove sharp objects from the barn, ensure good quality litter, and to control other diseases as well. So particularly things like infectious bursal disease, which may be immunosuppressive and make the birds more susceptible. Anecdotally, vaccines for Staph aureus in chickens are not effective, and antimicrobial therapy really needs to be based on susceptibility test results. Next, we're going to talk about Staphylococcus pseudintermedius in dogs. This is a very, very common colonizing organism. So I already mentioned approximately 90% of healthy dogs are colonized with Staph pseud, and it's happy to cause a wide variety of opportunistic infections. So anyone who's worked in companion animal practice has no doubt seen cases of pyoderma and otitis externa, from which Staph pseud is frequently isolated. It will also cause surgical site infections, infections of orthopedic implants, and in less common situations, even necrotizing fasciitis or nosocomial infections. In dogs, otitis externa and pyoderma are oftentimes secondary to an underlying disease. So the presence of a Staph pseudintermedius infection is telling you that there's something else going on with your patient. Whether it has atopic dermatitis, food allergy, or an endocrinopathy, addressing that primary disease is really key to success. In the case of skin infections, it's important to accurately characterize the nature of that infection. So is it a superficial or a deep pyoderma? Histopathology can be very helpful, particularly in chronic cases. And if we have otitis, what part of the ear is it in? Is it otitis externa? Is it media? Is it interna? These are things which a good physical exam can help you to determine clinically. For chronically affected animals, it can be worthwhile to consult with a dermatologist. These can be very challenging and frustrating cases to deal with, and so some expert assistance can be very useful. On the left here, you can see an image of canine pyoderma secondary to endocrinopathy. So you can see this reddened erythematous, sort of crusting, scaling, almost a scalded skin type syndrome. And then on the right, we have otitis externa secondary to atopy. I think you can appreciate this ear is reddened and has a somewhat greasy appearance. Exudative epidermitis, or greasy pig disease, is typically associated with Staph hyicus. This disease can be acute or peracute and tends to be sporadic within the herd. We see it most commonly in suckling and newly weaned piglets, so younger animals, and it occurs most often when we mix litters, we see the animals fighting, we have unclipped teeth, or there's rough bedding. So situations where the animal's skin is traumatized, where we have breaks in that normal host defense, and the Staph hyicus is able to gain entry. Among affected animals, the mortality rate can be quite high, up to 70%, although early antimicrobial treatment may be effective. Here you can see a piglet with exudative epidermitis, and I think you can appreciate why the name greasy pig disease is used colloquially. You can see greasy crusting lesions all over this animal. Here we have a close-up of another piglet with epidermitis, where those lesions are quite clear. Staphylococcus chromogenes is a coagulase negative staphylococcal species, and it's the most frequently isolated coag negative from bovine mastitis. We also find it in other small ruminants, and in pigs, it's even been reported to cause a syndrome very similar to greasy pig disease. When collecting samples to identify staphylococci, in the case of mastitis, you want to collect milk. Make sure to clean the outside of the teat before collection. Milk from the bulk tank can also be tested, but it's important to collect that immediately after milking. You don't want to have the organisms growing and replicating in the bulk tank, as that may not reflect what's happening in the udder. In the case of dermatitis or superficial infections, swabs, pus, or exudates are all good samples to collect. If we have a urinary tract infection, Staph pseudintermedius is actually the second most common cause of UTIs in dogs. Cystocentesis collected urine is preferable to free catch. And where we have systemic infections in chickens, collect yolk sacs, joints, and stab swabs of internal organs. Generally speaking, staphylococci are pretty tough and no special transport media is required. Having said that, in general, we don't want to freeze our samples. Of course, milk is the exception. Milk is cryoprotective, and samples from cows with mastitis certainly can be frozen. Staphylococci will be easily grown using standard culture methodologies, so it readily grows on blood agar, and no specialized testing is required to identify it. Staph species can easily be differentiated using either MALDI-TOF or biochemically. You may want to consider requesting selective culture for methicillin resistance, as this can help speed up the diagnostic process. Cytology can also be very useful. These are smears taken from a dog with pyoderma, and what you can see here are the presence of intracellular bacteria. So this is a neutrophil, and you can see these nice round little bacteria, which are actually Staph pseudintermedius. Cytology is really helpful in this case because Staph pseudintermedius is a normal inhabitant of canine skin. And so simply culturing positive doesn't mean you have an infection. Intracellular organisms indicates that there's an active inflammatory response and that these neutrophils are responding to something that's causing disease. Staphylococcus aureus exemplifies a broad host range. Infections or colonization in pretty much any species we've ever looked for it has been identified. Livestock-associated MRSA, so methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, a particular strain called ST398, is known to be common in pigs and cattle. In Canada, it's actually been found in 62% of pigs at slaughter, and human infections with this organism are well recognized. Sequence type 5 is a strain that's common in chickens. Horses seem to have their own population, and in the case of dogs and cats that have Staph aureus infections, they probably acquired them from people. So while each Staph aureus strain may have a preferred host, they're certainly capable of ping-ponging between species. Similarly, Staphylococcus pseudintermedius infections in people are increasingly recognized. This was some research that I had an opportunity to participate in over the last few years. And in the study on the left, we did a population-based study in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and found that compared to Staph aureus infections, the incidence of human infections with Staph pseud are about 700 times lower. So it's not very, very common, but it certainly does occur. And it's increasingly recognized as the use of MALDI-TOF becomes standard for identification in human diagnostic labs. From a risk perspective, standard precautions are really all that's required to protect yourself and your staff. So good hand washing protocols, personal protective equipment, like laboratory coats and gloves. When treating infections caused by staphylococci, you really need susceptibility testing. Resistance is emerging, and resistance profiles are really unpredictable. We do have some intrinsic resistance to the polymyxins among all staphylococci. Methicillin resistance has also become very common in recent years. Understanding the mechanism of resistance in these organisms is really important to therapeutic selection, and so I've made an explainer video that I'll link to above where you can get a more detailed explanation. When treating these infections, you may want to consider a locally administered therapy. Burroughs' solution for canine otitis or pyodermas have proven to be very helpful in treating staphylococcal infections in dogs. We have a couple pages of new terms today. So nosocomial and superantigen, and then the temporal markers of disease, peracute, acute, subacute, chronic, and subclinical. And finally, some questions for self-assessment.